Right, let's talk about a book that's about as cheerful as a root canal, but twice as important. It's called The Responsibility of Intellectuals, written by everyone's favorite politically engaged octogenarian, Noam Chomsky. Published back in 1967, smack dab in the middle of the Vietnam War, this book wasn't just timely, it was a goddamn Molotov cocktail lobbed into the laps of America's intellectual elite. Chomsky, never one to mince words, basically called them out for being, and I'm paraphrasing here, a bunch of bloody hypocrites. Chomsky's beef wasn't with all intellectuals, mind you, but with those who used their fancy degrees and prestigious platforms not to challenge power but to prop it up. He argued that true intellectuals have a moral obligation to use their privilege and brainpower to speak truth to power, to expose injustice, and to fight like hell against the warmongering, the propaganda, and the general bullshittery that governments, particularly powerful ones, tend to spew. Now you might be thinking, John mate, this all sounds a bit heavy for a Tuesday afternoon. Can't we just talk about the new season of Love Island or something? And look, I hear you. But trust me on this one, because Chomsky's ideas are more relevant today than ever. We live in a world saturated with information, misinformation, and outright lies. It's a bloody minefield out there, and we need all the critical thinking skills we can muster to navigate it. That's where Chomsky comes in. His work is a call to arms, urging us to question everything, to challenge authority, and to never, ever accept the official narrative at face value. And frankly, in this day and age, that's bloody good advice. So, what exactly did Chomsky want from these so-called intellectuals? Well, he basically laid out a job description. First and foremost, he argued that they have a duty to dissent. Not just disagreeing with your mate Dave down the pub about the best flavor of crisps, but actively challenging the status quo, particularly when it comes to things like war, social injustice, and the abuse of power. Chomsky believed that intellectuals have a responsibility to use their access to information and their platforms to expose the lies and manipulation that often underpin government policies. He wasn't afraid to call out his own country, the United States, for its role in the Vietnam War, arguing that it was an unjust war built on a foundation of lies and fueled by imperial ambitions. He also argued that intellectuals have a responsibility to educate the public, not in a condescending, let me enlighten you, you poor, ignorant soul kind of way, but by providing context, analysis, and different perspectives on the issues of the day. They should be helping people to understand the complexities of the world around them and empowering them to think critically for themselves. One of the key things that gets in the way of critical thinking, according to Chomsky, is propaganda. Now, when we hear the word propaganda, we might think of those cheesy posters from World War II with slogans like, "Loose lips sink ships." But Chomsky argued that propaganda is far more insidious and pervasive than that. He believed that governments and other powerful institutions use propaganda to manipulate public opinion and manufacture consent for their policies. This can take many forms, from biased news coverage and carefully crafted press releases to the outright suppression of dissenting voices. Chomsky stressed the importance of being able to identify and deconstruct propaganda. He argued that we need to be critical consumers of information, always questioning the source, the agenda, and the underlying assumptions of what we read, see, and hear. It's about learning to spot the subtle ways in which language is used to shape our perceptions and influence our thinking. Now, The Responsibility of Intellectuals wasn't just some abstract philosophical treatise. It was firmly rooted in the political realities of the time, particularly the Vietnam War. Chomsky saw the war as a prime example of how intellectuals could fail in their responsibility to speak truth to power. He argued that many intellectuals, particularly in the United States, had become complicit in the war effort by either actively supporting it or by remaining silent in the face of its horrors. They bought into the government's propaganda, they rationalized the violence, and they failed to hold those in power accountable for their actions. Chomsky's critique of the Vietnam War was scathing and uncompromising. He saw it as a war of aggression, fought for the sake of American imperialism and at the expense of countless Vietnamese lives. He argued that the war was not only morally wrong, but also strategically disastrous, and he was relentless in his efforts to expose the lies and hypocrisy that surrounded it. Section 5, Manufacturing Consent, How We're Sold War and Injustice. Now, the Vietnam War may be long over, but the tactics used to justify it are still very much in play today. Chomsky's work, particularly his later book co-authored with Edward S. Herman, Manufacturing Consent, delves deeper into how propaganda functions in democratic societies. They argued that rather than relying on brute force, modern democracies use more subtle methods to control the narrative and shape public opinion. These methods include things like controlling the flow of information, selecting which experts get a platform, and using fear and emotional appeals to manipulate the public. Chomsky and Herman identified 5 filters that they believe shape the news we consume. Ownership, which refers to the corporate interests of media conglomerates, advertising, or the need to please sponsors. Sourcing, which is the reliance on government and corporate sources. Flack, meaning pressure from powerful interest groups. And fear, using fear and patriotism to control the narrative. Now you might be thinking, okay John, but that was the 20th century. Surely things are different now. Well, here's the thing. Chomsky's ideas haven't aged a day. In fact, they're arguably more relevant than ever in our current political climate. We live in an age of information overload where it's increasingly difficult to separate fact from fiction. The rise of social media has created echo chambers where people are constantly bombarded with information that confirms their existing biases, making it easier than ever to fall prey to propaganda and misinformation. Whether it's the climate crisis, economic inequality, or the erosion of democratic norms, the challenges we face today require critical thinking, a healthy dose of skepticism, and a willingness to challenge those in power. And those are precisely the qualities that Chomsky has always championed. The spirit of dissent that Chomsky embodied during the Vietnam War is still alive and well today. From the streets of Hong Kong to the climate strikes led by Greta Thunberg, people around the world are raising their voices against injustice and demanding change. We see it in the work of journalists and whistleblowers who risk their careers and even their lives to expose corruption and abuse of power. We see it in the activism of ordinary citizens who organize protests, circulate petitions, and use social media to hold their leaders accountable. Chomsky's work reminds us that dissent is not just a right but a responsibility, particularly for those who have the platform and the privilege to make their voices heard. It's a call to action for all of us to be engaged citizens, to challenge the status quo, and to never stop fighting for a more just and equitable world. But what happens when intellectuals fail to live up to their responsibility? What are the consequences of their silence? Chomsky argues that the price of silence is complicity. When those with a platform and a voice choose to remain silent in the face of injustice, they become complicit in that injustice. He reminds us that history is full of examples of intellectuals who turned a blind eye to the atrocities of their time, who used their intellect to rationalize the unjustifiable, and who ultimately failed to live up to their moral obligations. Chomsky's work serves as a stark reminder that silence is not neutral. It is a choice, and it is a choice that has consequences. Every time we choose to remain silent in the face of injustice, we contribute to the problem. We become part of the system that allows injustice to flourish. So there you have it. The responsibility of intellectuals is not exactly a light read, but it is an important one. It's a call to action, a challenge to think critically, and a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world. Chomsky's work is a reminder that we must never stop questioning, never stop challenging, and never stop speaking out against injustice. It is a call to engage with the world around us, to be informed citizens, and to use our voices to make a difference. As Chomsky himself once said, the intellectual tradition is a tradition of dissent. It's about having the courage to question everything, to challenge authority, and to speak truth to power no matter the cost. And frankly, in these rather strange and uncertain times, we could all use a bit more of that. Right, that's it. Go forth and read the bloody book.